Last year, I was doing a usability study on Google for Nonprofits website, and one of our users was Kim, who's the marketing director for Nuru. And we got to talking after the user session, and I had just gone to Kenya for a vacation, and so we were talking about Kenya, and she was telling me about some of the work that Nuru was doing. And I started thinking a lot about, hey, what could I do? I saw a lot of extreme poverty when I was in Kenya, and in doing some of my research and kind of reading up on it, I found that extreme poverty is actually a solvable problem, a big problem, but solvable in our generation. We've seen a lot of economic progress in places like India and Brazil and China in our lifetimes, so it seemed like it's a solvable problem. But I didn't know what to do. And then I got an invitation from Kim to hear Jake speak, that he was going to be in the area and he was going to be speaking. And I went to hear him speak. And I was really inspired because some of the things that he was talking about is, if you've seen some of the posters, that Nuru's approach is scalable and measurable and sustainable. And those things really resonated with me because that's exactly how Google goes about solving tough challenges. So I've been doing some work with Nuru, and I'm really excited to have Jake here to tell us more.
Thank you, Marianne. So thank you guys so much for coming out. I know you're all very busy, and it's nice to be, I told Marianne it's very nice to be like kind of inside of Oz. You know, like this place is obviously very famous, so it's nice to have an introduction to Google, to corporate. Today we're going to talk a little bit about extreme poverty. And like Marianne said, the numbers can be very daunting. I'm sure you've all heard the numbers. You know, 1 out of 6 people in this world suffer from extreme poverty. They don't have enough to feed their kids every night. 1 out of 6 people can't find clean drinking water for their families. Little girls are walking 5 hours a day just to get to a nearby water source, and they're threatened by all kinds of security risks. You know, they could be raped along the way. They might not actually even get that water. By the time they bring it home, it's probably dirty, and it's going to make their family sick anyway. People are living in extremely horrible conditions around the world without the ability to make meaningful choices to actually determine their own family's futures. It can seem like a really daunting problem. It's huge, and it's global. And so a lot of times we as individuals, when you're up against a problem like that, a lot of times what we want to do is we just kind of want to throw our hands in the air and say, well, I can't really do anything. This challenge is way too massive. And I'm hoping one of the things that you can walk away with from today's message is that any of us can make a difference. Each one of us in the fight against extreme poverty can make a difference. You know, Marianne is doing what she can to make a difference in helping spread the word about what groups like us are doing. I'm going to tell you my story, and I'm hoping that it can inspire you to get involved in what we're doing, or what other good organizations are doing around the world, as an example of someone who comes from a very different background. I do come from a very different approach and a very different background, different experiences in the fight against extreme poverty. And so what I'd like to do is, first of all, tell you about my story, how I got into this work, tell you about Nuru's model, how it's designed, how it's a very different tactic in fighting extreme poverty, and then tell you a little bit about our impact and our exciting progress as we get ready now to expand now even to our second country. That sound okay to everybody? All right, good. All right, so I founded this organization called Nuru. Nuru means light or hope in Swahili. And what we seek to do is we work with extremely poor individuals and families in remote rural areas. That's our focus. And we empower them with the ability to make meaningful choices to lift their own communities out of extreme poverty, not for a week, not for a year, but permanently. And then we, as the Western entity, the Western staff and funding, exit the project, leaving behind a completely self-sustaining model that is continuing to scale to eventually have national level impact. So my story, in my old life, I was a Marine Corps Special Operations Platoon Commander. So it's very different than this kind of work. But the experiences that I had in my old job actually led me into this field. I was deployed with my guys kind of all around the world. We did 2 tours of combat in Iraq, other parts of the Middle East, parts of Southwest Asia. And it was my experiences, my personal experiences in combat, that began to allow me to see a connection between the things that we were fighting, terrorism, insurgency, instability, kind of global conflict situations, and extreme poverty. And today I want to talk to you a little bit about one of the most intense personal experiences that caused me to have a serious awakening and drive me into this new field that I'm operating in right now. So I want to take you back a little bit to 2003. And do you guys remember the invasion? Remember when we first went into Iraq? Okay, so I was in one of the Marine Corps units that was in the front. Okay, we were on the front lines, and I don't know if you remember what the missions were at the time, but the Army was making a big sweep to the west to take the Baghdad International Airport. The Marine Corps' job was to push kind of straight up the gut to eventually take Baghdad from southern Iraq all the way into Baghdad. And so, you know, as we pushed north, the Iraqi army was retreating, and they were going to make a final kind of last stand in Baghdad. But instead of fighting the army, Saddam was pushing his special forces guys called Fedayeen south into southern Iraq, and they were going village to village recruiting people. And to kind of set the stage for what was happening at the time, southern Iraq at the time was one of the poorest places in the world. You know, many of the challenges I just told you about, families not being able to feed their kids, not being able to have clean water, couldn't send their kids to school. There were no schools. You know, not being able to afford basic health care. You know, kids were dying from malaria and diarrhea, easily preventable diseases. So the Fedayeen were going hut to hut in these villages, and they were telling these mothers and fathers, you know, your kids are starving right in front of you. We'll feed your kids, and we'll get them to school if you'll strap this bomb to yourself and go blow yourself up, or pick up this weapon you've never seen before and don't know how to use and go fight these people you never even heard of. And what I found was we were fighting these people by the hundreds and thousands. We weren't fighting top-notch special forces or, army individuals. We were fighting poor people who had never seen a gun before. And that kind of sets the stage for this awakening that I had in combat. So as we push through southern Iraq, you know, war is, as many of you know, war is a horrible thing. It is one of the most terrible things that we can do to each other as human beings. And then there's a time and place for conflict, but you know, things happen in war. You know, stories get written that you just can't unwrite. And as we were pushing north in the early days, the first major casualties happened in a place called Nasiriyah. You might remember a battle called the Battle of Nasiriyah. And as we entered into the city, we thought that it had been surrendered by the 11th Infantry Division of the Iraqi Army. And what we found out was that it was a trick. And over 50 of our Marines lost their lives in an ambush in a matter of 10 minutes. And what we thought was going to be rushing through this city on our way to Baghdad turned into a knockdown, drag-out fight. We were able to fight our way through the city, and we set up a defensive perimeter north of Nasiriyah, and we had to stop. We had to wait. And we were all oriented north on this highway called Highway 7. It was our main avenue of approach. And I can tell you there's nothing worse in combat than sitting and waiting, especially after you just got ambushed. And the reason we were waiting is because we hadn't eaten in about a day and a half or 2 days, and we had to wait for our supply chains to kind of catch up with us. So as we're sitting there waiting, you know, I'm scared, my guys are scared, we're terrified. Anybody who tells you that they're not scared in combat is crazy or lying, one of the two. It was a very scary situation. So I got up out of my fighting hole, and I wanted to walk the lines to check on my guys to see if they were okay. And as I'm walking the lines, I looked up on the highway and I saw a little white car actually approaching our position, and it was racing toward our little blockade there. And as it was coming, I grabbed my guys, three of my guys, and we took off running toward the car. We thought this car had been loaded with explosives and they were going to blow themselves up in our position. So we're running toward the car trying to get it to stop, and it wasn't stopping. And so I fired a warning shot over the car. Finally, it stopped about 50 meters out, and the driver hopped out of the driver's side, started waving his arms frantically, and sprinting toward me. So my conclusion at that point was, well, okay, he strapped a bomb to himself, and now he's going to try to blow himself up. And so I'm desperately trying to get this guy to get on the ground. Stop. I'm yelling at him in Arabic, trying to get him to just stop and where he was at before he got to our position, but he wasn't stopping. So as I raised my weapon up, thinking I'm going to have to take this guy out, I looked behind him, and I saw a large black military truck roll up behind his little white car. 6 guys in black jumped out of that truck, ran up to his car, and began shooting into the car. And the guy stopped dead in his tracks, started screaming, and turned around and started sprinting back to the car. And that's when I realized what was happening. This man was one of those poor farmers who had been, who the Fedayeen were trying to recruit. He was trying to escape across our lines with his family. And when I realized what was happening, I yelled at my guys and told them to take out the fedayeen. As I was running, I was sprinting, desperately trying to make it to this car to save this guy's family. But by the time I got there, it was too late. His wife was in the passenger side. She was slumped over. She'd been shot in the face, in the chest. She was dead. He had a little infant baby girl in the back. Her arm had been blown off, and she was also shot in the face. She was dead. And he was cradling his little 6-year-old daughter who had been shot in the abdomen, and she was choking on her own blood. And this guy was beside himself. You know, in a matter of 2 seconds, he lost everything that he had in this world. And everything changed for me. Everything slowed down the war. And for the first time, I put myself in this guy's shoes. And I thought to myself, you know, I live in a world of choices. What school do I want to go to? What job do I want to have? What do I want to wear that day? What do I want to eat for breakfast? What were this guy's choices when he woke up this morning? You know, he could watch his kids starve to death right in front of him. He could pick up a weapon he'd never seen before and go fight people he never heard of. Or he could make some desperate attempt to escape with his family, knowing the fedayeen were in the hut right next door. He had no choices. And I looked in this guy's eyes, and I never want to see that look again in a person's eyes. I looked in that guy's eyes, and I didn't know what to do. For the first time in the war, I didn't know what to do. And I let my weapon hang at my side, and I just began to cry with this guy. And then I got really, really angry. And I thought to myself, I never want to see this again. I never want to see an individual who has no choices just because of where they're born. This guy didn't do anything wrong. He was limited in his choices just because of where he was born. And that's not fair. You know, I mean, there's no technical language around that. It's just not fair. It's not just. And that was the beginning of an awakening in me and a journey into the life that I'm doing right now. I did another tour in combat doing counter-terrorist operations south of Baghdad, but I saw the same things again and again and again. A look of absolute desperation in the eyes of young men and women, actually, who would strap a bomb to themselves and come running into our position. And, you know, it wasn't out of some kind of misplaced sense of hatred for the West. It was out of love for that little 5-year-old son and 3-year-old daughter at home that were starving to death. So I made one of the toughest decisions I made at that point in my life, and I decided to leave my guys and leave my career. I was on a very different path in life, and an upward career in the Marine Corps and Special Operations, and decided to devote my life to addressing the challenge where I felt I could make even more of an impact in the war on terror and global instability, which is by taking on the problem of extreme poverty. So I got out of the Marine Corps, and I was faced with this question that I started with today with you guys. Extreme poverty. What the heck do you do to fight extreme poverty? It's a massive problem. There are thousands of people trying to take this issue on and have been trying to do it for decades now. So where do you even start? I had an engineering degree from the Naval Academy. I wasn't a development economist. I wasn't a Peace Corps guy. You know, I didn't know the science behind the field. So what I decided to do, I was committed. You know, when I made the decision to leave my old life, you know, there was no turning back on that decision. I was 110% committed to this, and I was going to figure it out. And so I wanted to do it differently, though. I didn't want to just build something, a nonprofit or an NGO that was going to waste people's money. If I was going to take this path, I wanted to build something that could be scalable, that could be measurable, and that would be sustainable, that could have a global impact in extreme poverty in taking on this challenge. So I spent about a year and a half of my life dedicated just to researching the problem of extreme poverty. Who are some other organizations out there? What are they doing? What's working? What's not working? And kind of why? Because as you guys know, I'm sure you could rattle off a lot of the names of organizations right now that you know about. There's some really good models out there that are working in isolation, so why not learn from them? So I really studied the field, and I tried to understand, okay, looking at this model, what is working? Let's try to take that and embed it and use it. And what's not working, let's tweak that to make it a little bit better. And I began to form some ideas in my head. And I decided, you know, I can start something right now, or I can, you know, and have kind of a moderate impact, or I could go to learn the language of business to understand how to build and scale a global organization. And so I decided to go to business school, and I applied to Harvard and Stanford, decided to go to Stanford because of a real focus on social innovation and entrepreneurship. And it was really amazing. When I went to Stanford, over 30 of my classmates had a very similar awakening that I had in combat. They heard my story, they heard the vision of what I wanted to do. You know, I went to Stanford just to do this, just to build this entity, to take on extreme poverty. And, you know, it's great. I mean, they got involved in helping me build out a metric system, a rigorous metric system to measure our performance and the efficacy of the model. A team built out our marketing and branding strategy. I had a team focusing on our financial model, building out the business plan. Had a team doing fundraising for me. It was amazing. Over 6 faculty members at the GSB at Stanford got involved as well, provided seed funding, mentorship, kind of advice along the way. And I did kind of a non-standard business school internship between my first and second year. I was actually out in the bush in Western Kenya trying to figure this thing out about how do we begin building something from the bottom up. And then by the time I graduated, you know, I incorporated the organization while I was at school, my second year. So, you know, I'd be going to class and trying to dash out of class, trying to make it to funder meetings to see if I could raise money. Many of you probably have been entrepreneurs as well, and you know the challenges of raising money to seed a new idea. And by the time we graduated, we were fortunate enough to have about $450,000 that we'd raised so I could launch my project. And I graduated in June 2008, hired the team that I've been recruiting, and then we launched our pilot project in the second poorest area of Kenya called the Kuria district in southwest Kenya in September. We started with a handful of farmers in that September of 2008, and now 3 years later we're actually working with over 15,000 people that we're impacting right now. And it's been a crazy ride. We've seen incredible progress, and I want to talk to you about the model and what we're all about now so that you can see how this is a very different approach to tackling poverty. And before, I want to show you a video, actually, because pictures speak a lot louder than words. I want to show you some of the impact we've had. It's a little birthday video that we did celebrating our 3rd year. But before I do that, I want you to understand that at Nuru, I think one of the things that has made us so successful is that we understand we're a very learning organization. And we're the first to tell you we don't have it all figured out. We don't even have half of it figured out right now. We need to learn from everybody out there. We can learn from you guys. Actually, there's a lot of Googlers that have helped us build what we're doing right now. And if you have the attitude that you can admit your mistakes, understand enough to know what you don't know, and then go seek that knowledge out, you can really begin to build something and rapidly adapt to challenges as you face them in the field and elsewhere. Okay? So without further ado, let me show you this video, and then I want to talk to you a little bit about what we do.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
I am Nuru.
I am Nuru.
I'm Nuru. I am Nuru.
I am Nuru. Mimi ni
I
Nuru.
am Nuru.
I am Nuru.
I am Nuru. I am Nuru.
Before Nuru came, I was desperate. I used to beg around for food for my children. Now that I am a farmer with Nuru, we have enough food to eat, and I can sell the rest to pay for my children's school fees.
I was getting 2 to 3 sacks of maize per acre, and we were hungry. But Nuru taught me how to farm, gave me a loan of seeds and fertilizer, and now I'm getting 15 sacks per acre.
Before Nuru, my life was very hard. I had no money, no food, and no home. But now I'm harvesting 25 bags of maize per acre. I was able to build a house of my own.
Before Nuru came, my brother and I will plant maize and sometimes harvest nothing. But now we are getting 18 sacks of maize per acre and can feed our families.
With a small loan from Nuru, I was able to open this kiosk. My business has been very successful, and now I'm able to pay school fees for my children.
Before Nuru came, I was very poor. I couldn't get even food to eat, but Nuru has brought us light. I wish for them to continue to end extreme poverty here in Kuria.
Happy birthday,
Happy
Nuru.
birthday,
Happy
Nuru.
birthday, Nuru.
Happy birthday, Nuru.
Happy birthday, Nuru.
Happy birthday, Nuru.
Thank you to Nuru.
Happy birthday, Nuru International. Happy birthday to you.
Okay, so you saw a little taste there of some of the impact that we've had in the last 3 years. And actually, at the time of the video was made, there were about 10,000 people that we were working with. And as of today, there's over 15,000 now. We're growing really quickly. And we've seen some exciting growth. It's very exciting for me, so I get kind of wound up. I want to talk to you now a little bit about what we actually do. So what is Nuru? How are we different? How are we different than every other organization out there? Nuru, like I said, is a Swahili word that means light or hope. And we are a holistic, integrated development model. We take an integrated approach to fighting poverty. And, integrated approaches just make a lot of sense. We focus on agriculture, health, education, water and sanitation, economic development. It's a 5-pronged approach. And it makes a lot of sense to try to address the challenges in each one of those areas. But the problem is that there's a lot of other organizations that try to do the same thing. They take a holistic or integrated approach. The problem with that, though, is it's extremely difficult to make that sustainable and to be able to scale that. And to date, nobody's actually been able to do that effectively. And that's where we come in. We think we've landed on a model now that's going to be able to be not only sustainable and scalable, but sustainable and scalable by the local leaders, not by Western individuals. One of the key innovations in our model is we go in and we equip the poor, we untap the potential in the poor themselves, actually, to be able to lift their own communities out of extreme poverty permanently. We embed revenue models into the project, businesses, to make revenue streams that actually sustain the project over time after we leave, and also fuel the project to scale it to eventually have a national level impact. That scale up is done through Kenya generated revenues and also Kenya generated leaders. It's not Western individuals that are beginning to scale this project throughout Kenya. It's the Kenyans. And that's a key innovation. We found that true sustainability lies in 2 major factors: financial sustainability and leadership sustainability. A lot of organizations in the sector, they talk about sustainability, and everybody talks about it, right? And your eyes glaze over and you kind of get really bored. But we actually take a very focused approach in what we mean when we say sustainability. And we're very serious about creating sustainability in both those areas. If you just have revenues that are generated to fund the expansion of the project and you don't have the leadership, the local leadership to buy into and scale it, your project's going to die 1 to 2 years after you exit. Also, if you have a strong core of leadership that has a vision for their country and the capability to be able to innovate past challenges as they meet them, but they don't have the financial backing to be able to do that, the project will also die. So that's why we have this kind of 2-pronged approach in focusing on sustainability. So a little more specifics about each of the 5 areas that we work on. We talk about these 5 areas: ag, health, water, education, and economic development. This 5-pronged approach is what we call the impact framework. That rests on a firm foundation of our leadership development program. Our leadership development program is the true key to our sustainability of our approach. We're equipping local leaders with a civic-minded, service-minded attitudes and principles of leadership to have a vision for their country, and then we're also equipping them to be critical thinking, problem-solving innovators. We teach our local leaders about design thinking, to be able to develop empathy for the users in the community, to be able to brainstorm, rapid prototyping, to be able to do testing and iteration of those models and solutions that they're creating to make them more and more effective on their own, not with us. One of the most important lessons that I've learned in doing this work is that the greatest solution to extreme poverty, the greatest solution to poverty in general, lies within the poor themselves. It's nothing that we're going to create. They have incredible potential. These folks that I work with are far more capable, far more resourceful, far more intelligent than I'll ever be. They have survived through things and learned lessons in life that can equip them to do amazing things. And once we see the poor as peers and not as little children that need to be handheld along the way, that's when true innovation and lasting solutions can begin to be built. So I talk about an integrated model. A lot of times when organizations talk about integrated models, they're very infrastructure intensive, very capital intensive, which makes them very difficult to scale. We take a different approach. Instead of trying to be experts in all 5 of those areas that we talked about, like I told you before, there's a lot of great organizations already doing good work in those 5 areas, right? I mean, has anybody heard of organizations out there doing good work? Probably, right? Otherwise you probably wouldn't be at this talk. So instead, what we do is we have this kind of mantra: there's no room in this business for egos. We don't care who gets credit. So we have a research team that goes out there and finds the very best models already working in those 5 areas, and then we just go learn from those organizations. We do internships, externships with those groups. We do conferences with them. We get their training manuals. We learn their model inside and out, probably better than they do. And then we take those ideas and we pull them into our programs, into our Nuru communities, and we equip our local leaders with those models and with those ideas. And then Nuru simply acts as a general contractor of the best and most scalable ideas from around the world. We're taking lessons learned, best practices from other organizations who have already worked on it. That does a couple things for us. It saves us a lot of money. It saves us a lot of time. Okay, and it also prevents us from making mistake after mistake after mistake. This reinventing of the wheel that this sector is so challenged by so often. So as a couple examples, I'll give you a high-level snapshot of what we do in each one of these 5 programs. In agriculture, we're fighting chronic hunger. We seek to increase crop yields to provide a stable supply of food for the families so they can feed themselves, and also creating some disposable income. To do that, we actually use an organization's model called 1 Acre Fund. 1 Acre Fund has put together a groundbreaking model where it's very simple. You provide high quality inputs, fertilizer and seed, to people on loan. We don't do any handouts. On loan, you train and equip them with the best practices on how to use those inputs, and then you provide the supervision to ensure that they're being used properly. Just by doing that, we've been able to increase crop yields between 150 and 200% in the villages that we're working in. This dramatically changes the world for these families. Not only can they feed their kids now, but they also have disposable income. You're creating an economic base in the community. So the next question is, okay, what do we do with that income? Because there's a lot of challenges now, but when families in extreme poverty have income, they begin to do things with it that aren't actually that forward-looking. So what we do is our economic development program teaches those families how to save. We have savings clubs. You'll hear a lot. Has anybody heard of microfinance? Okay. So you'll hear a lot of talk about microfinance, microlending. There's a lot of valuable lessons to learn from microfinance, but microfinance and microlending in isolation don't work, okay? It can actually be damaging to the community. You get a big culture of things like predatory lending. You have a lot of individuals taking loans out that shouldn't be taking loans out. It's funny because for some reason, here in Silicon Valley, you might have, 1% of the population that are really entrepreneurs, and that can actually build something and scale it. For some reason in the developing world, we think that every poor person is an entrepreneur. If you give them a loan, they can change the world. That's just not true, okay? They're just like us. Not everybody wants to be an entrepreneur, first of all, and not everybody has the capacity to be a good entrepreneur, second. So instead, we teach these folks how to save first, how to save and plan for their family's future in basic financial planning. And then we provide basic banking services to the remote rural poor that they never had before. So they're not scalped by big banking fees and high interest rates of a lot of the MFIs that they see out in these areas. Once they have a good savings profile, then we begin to introduce access to credit so they can take microloans out, the ones that are capable and the ones that have an interest in that. They can also begin to take loans out to pay for school fees for their kids, to build businesses, to expand their farm, to create more crops and then more income. Okay, so that's kind of our economic development program. We've learned a lot in that field from groups like the Grameen Bank, like a group called Frontline SMS Credit from Kiva. A lot of you probably heard about Kiva and Jessica Jackley. So that's kind of what we do in our economic development piece. Once they have a stable kind of economic base that we produce through agriculture and economic development, now they have disposable income that they can use to pay for services in healthcare, water, and education. So our healthcare model is a very simple model. We actually stole it from, we partnered with them, but we took it from Living Goods and Partners in Health. You guys, has anybody ever read Mountains Beyond Mountains about Paul Farmer? Brilliant man. Okay, so he started Partners in Health. We learned a lot from them about community health worker models. Living Goods was started by a guy here in the Valley called Chuck Slaughter, and they have a really cool model where it's almost like an Avon Lady model, where the health workers go hut to hut, and they teach basic disease prevention and treatment, but they also sell health and hygiene products to the families that are going to actually help them. This does a couple things. Now the families don't have to walk 2 hours to the market to try to find these products, but number two, it provides a revenue stream that actually helps cover the cost of the community health workers' salaries. That's our healthcare program, and we target under 5s mortality. Our goal is to decrease the under 5s mortality rate in a lot of these areas so that kids aren't dying from stupid diseases. Malaria is completely preventable. So is diarrhea. We all get diarrhea here. I mean, nobody wants to talk about it, but everybody gets diarrhea here too, but we know how to fix it. We know how to treat it, right? They don't have access to those basic things to be able to do it. And so there are thousands of people dying from that crazy disease, okay? In water and sanitation, that is actually our focus. Our focus is to decrease the diarrheal rate. Waterborne illnesses, waterborne diseases are one of the leading causes, obviously, of diarrhea, and therefore deaths of under 5s. So what we do in water and sanitation, we've learned from a lot of really good organizations like water.org, WaterAid, and some other groups. And what we've learned is that actually targeting sanitation is very important. A lot of groups, they go out and they drill a lot of wells, okay, to provide what are called point-of-source solutions. The challenge with that is when you drill wells, it's very expensive, okay? So we talked about scaling our models in a sustainable way, generating revenues to pay for that. It's very difficult to pay for $15,000 US every well that you sink for a population of 200 people, and then scaling that to a country, to over 4 million people, right? So in these remote areas. That becomes very challenging. So we had to think kind of outside the box and think about, okay, instead of point of source, let's talk about point of use. Because some of the latest research right now shows that little girls, they go to these wells. Let's say you drill a well. You got a clean source of water. The little girls go, they collect that water. Then they carry it on their heads with their hands on top of the bucket like this, and they have fecal matter on their hands. So they contaminate the water on the way back to their homes. So by the time they get home, families are still getting sick, and people were wondering why. So instead of point-of-source solutions, we actually address point-of-use solutions. Simple things like teaching people to boil water, basic water filters, things called Water Garden Pure, which is chlorination products, okay? And more importantly, we teach people how to just do good hand-washing techniques. So our water sanitation program actually sells a suite of what we call WASH products. WASH is water and sanitation and hygiene. We have hand washing units and clean water storage units that we actually had local leaders go through the design thinking methodology to design a very practical, low-cost model that can be sold in the local communities. Then we do training to generate demand for that product. And these things, it's amazing. These things are selling like hotcakes, and it's driving the diarrheal rates down, okay? Very simple solutions. And the really cool thing is that this is not like big brains in the West bringing these ideas in. These ideas are coming from the communities too. They're helping take the best research and best practices from around the world, filtering it through the lens of experience and knowledge that they have survived through to make sure that the solutions are relevant so they can be lasting. And finally, in education, what we do is we target, our goal is to increase child literacy. There are a lot of, as you guys know, I mean, education is a mess globally. Education's a mess here. Right? This is one of the most challenging areas to make an impact. Our goal is to increase child literacy to what's called a standard 2 level. Here in the U.S. it'd be grade 2 or 2nd grade, right? And the reason we target that is because at that level of reading, kids begin to learn to read to learn, or read to understand and comprehend, so that when they're in their history and science class and in their writing class, they can actually, as they're reading their textbooks, they can understand the concepts and apply them. So instead of going out there and building a bunch of schools and focusing on training government-sponsored teachers, we don't do that. Actually what the developing world does not need more of is a bunch of buildings. If any of you have traveled in the developing world, you will go out to these remote areas, you'll see a lot of empty buildings that have great nonprofit names on the side of them, or some rich dude's name on the side of it. And these are from really well-meaning people and well-meaning organizations. But the challenge is they don't need more buildings, okay? They need more capacity building. All right? We need to be able to work from the structures that are already in place to be able to increase the education levels of the kids, teaching teachers different learning techniques, different teaching techniques, okay? So we actually take a different approach. And also, building a lot of schools is not sustainable either. It's the same problem as the wells have, right? Every time you build a school, it costs a lot of money. So instead, we work within the existing public school system. We go to those schools and work with the head teachers and the teachers to do really great alternative education practices that go against the standard education practices taught in a lot of the developing countries. You might have heard of this practice called rote memorization type of learning. It's you guys in the U.S. the equivalent is kind of the lecture method. It's very non-participatory. It's just the teacher in the front kind of blah, 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 and the kids recite exactly what the teacher just said. There's no learning in that. You can pass a test that way, but there's no comprehension that way. We actually teach experiential learning, participatory learning through things like reading hour, writing workshops, creative learning games that the kids can participate in. And by doing that, we're using a tool piloted by a group called Owazo that can effectively measure the increase in the children's literacy. We're having a lot of success with that. We also target out-of-school kids because one of the challenges in these areas, there's a lot of kids in these communities that just can't go to school. Their parents can't afford to pay for them to go yet. So what we do is we build a learning center, a drop-in center, where these children can come. We build one per district, okay? So these kids can come from the outlying areas and experience actually the same programs at the learning center staffed by Nuru Kenya staff. So that's kind of a summary of our programs. And now I'll talk to you a little bit briefly about our impact, and then I'll take any questions that you guys might have, okay? So it has been a very exciting time for us. We've seen this rapid growth going from a handful of farmers to 15,000 people that we're impacting now. And we've got a big vision. We want to aggressively grow. With my background, I want to do this work, and our team wants to do this work in the toughest places in the world. We specifically selected remote rural areas. We don't do peri-urban, we don't do urban. We focus on remote rural areas, and we want to be in failed states and conflict zones. So our target countries are Somalia, Yemen, the Sudan, Afghanistan, DRC. Those are our target countries. That's where we want to do this work. And that's where we see the greatest need to be right now. But we decided that we need to build this model. It's a very different approach, and we need to take it through proof of concept in a relatively politically stable area first that also demonstrates extreme need. I get this question all the time, and it's a great question. Why did you pick Kenya if you were in Iraq and saw this connection, right? So that's why. We need to prove this model first, take it through proof of concept, and then begin to building into more and more volatile countries, introducing more volatility to the model as we go, once we have that proof of concept. Our communities are no longer hungry. Our communities have disposable income. We're seeing people going from mud huts, they're now building semi-permanent homes from brick and iron sheets. I mean, there's amazing transformation. Kids are going to school. The schools are crowded now, right? They're able to actually, they're instead of the kids being so afraid of learning now, they're participating in their classes with their teachers. The teachers are coming to our Nuru staff saying, teach us how to teach like that, We're seeing hand washing stations are showing up in all the huts around the communities. People are using bed nets properly for the first time, and it's bed nets that they purchased, not bed nets that were given that end up as wedding veils or tablecloths or curtains, right? They're taught how to use these things, and malaria rates are going down as well. So it's some really exciting impact, and we have a lot of hope for this model, and we have a bold vision for scaling it too. The big picture concept of where we're going, the Nuru model is designed, I told you it's self-sustaining once we hit a certain scale, right? Our unit of scale is 30,000 people. In Kenya, that looks like a district. So once we hit that scale, the financial model is designed so that it is self-sustaining, and it's generating a profit, actually, that will actually enable us to fuel the expansion of the district model to a second and third district. And then each of those districts grow to scale, impacting 30,000, and then they split off and start 2 more projects. But that's done by revenues generated in Kenya and led by Kenyans. So to investors in the West, instead of dumping, we've dumped $2.3 trillion into sub-Saharan Africa in the last 50 years, and we don't have a whole heck of a lot to show for it, okay? So instead of this endless dumping of capital into the developing world, we're going to be able to tell investors $2.5 to $3 million into this country. We'll build it out to a sustainable platform that will eventually impact all of the communities in the remote rural areas. In Kenya, that's about 4 million people. So you're talking less than $1 per person to have a permanent, sustainable impact empowering these folks out of poverty. And we're not doing it, they're doing it. That's the key to lasting sustainability. So that's Nuru. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to listen to me kind of run my mouth a little bit here. It's really a privilege and an honor to be able to talk to you. I love telling our story. I love spreading the word. If you like what you've heard today or you find it interesting, we would encourage a dialogue with you guys. If you have questions, I mean, I'm gonna be sticking around here, Marianne, to go to lunch. Charles Malloy is also here with me today. He's one of our staff members, and we'd love to answer questions that you have and love to get you involved. And you know what? When you walk away from today's talk too, I want you to realize that there's a lot of other good organizations out there as well. If you don't get involved with us and you don't want to specifically maybe figure out how you can get involved with us, there's a lot of other great work out there. I feel passionately that we're all called to get into this fight against extreme poverty. You know, I started my talk by saying it's just not fair. It's not fair that these conditions exist, and you can do something about it. So I would encourage you, as you walk away from this fight, you go back to your desk, just take 10 minutes. Take 10 minutes and think about the gifts and talents that you've been given. You guys are really talented, bright people. Think about ways that you can get into the fight against extreme poverty. If it's not with us, that's fine. Find another group that you can get involved with, because there's a lot of ways to get into that fight. Okay, thanks.
So we've got time for a couple questions, so if you want to come on up.
Yeah, thanks for a terrific talk and for
you.
what you're doing. I had one question about your strategy for how you're going to start and how you're going to expand this. It makes perfect sense what you said about starting in some place like Kenya and then looking at going to, say, Somalia or DRC or something. Do you have any kind of indication about what kind of reception the locals are likely to give you there? Not so much the people that need it, but the people who might, chase you away or shoot at you or something.
Yeah, that's a great question. And with my background, doing what I had done in my former life, security challenges in developing countries is kind of something that I specialized in. So we're developing a lot of strategies about how to work in very unstable, very volatile areas, working with different clans, different tribes, different militias, actually, and trying to think about creative incentives, innovating around creative incentives to ensure that the work that's done in a seed project does not get torn down by rivaling tribes. And one of the ways that we do that in a very practical way is the way that we scale. As we grow immediately out from the communities that we begin working in. We don't do what I call village hopping. A lot of groups will have some success and they'll move 100 miles, they'll plop another project down there and scale from there. So you have little pockets that you grow from around the country. We actually scale immediately out to the communities around us. And the reason that we do that is because the new villages are pulling us in. It's a pull effect. They see the impact right before their eyes, and they want their families to be able to benefit from the same stuff. And so then we take that model there, and our leaders are trained and equipped to be able to take this model across tribes, across ethnicities, to other people groups, and they have a vision to do that in this kind of servant leader type mindset. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Thanks. I was looking at listening to everything you said and trying to imagine how it would translate to a country I have particular interest in, which is Liberia. Mm-hmm. And Liberia is, good. It wasn't on your list since they're technically a post-conflict zone. But one of the things, the missing pieces, which I think you've just touched on a little bit, is that there is a lot of remaining conflict still there. So there's ethnic conflict, but there's also a massive amount of land use conflict over whose land this actually is.
Right.
And since you're building primarily from an agricultural standpoint, I'm going to guess that in DRC and Sudan, there's also land use and ownership is a major issue. Do you have you started thinking about how to tackle those issues?
We have, actually, but that's a great question. First of all, let me say that I don't know. Okay, I don't have a perfect answer for you.
I don't know is an excellent way to start.
That's a great question, and we're working hard to try to find an answer for that. We have some other groups that we're working with that are already doing work in DRC specifically, because DRC is a very interesting, a challenging area for that specific problem. There's a lot of land grabbing that's going on right now, and we've got a group there that's working on blocking off 10-hectare farms and working with groups of farmers, actually instead of individual farmers, groups of farmers that will own that land together. Because a lot of these societies are group-oriented societies. It's not really as individualistic as it is here in the West. And so working with those groups to produce high-value products or high-value crops on those plots of land, and then having many of these kind of 10-hectare plots within a given community to really increase the size of the population that, and ownership of that land. There's a lot of challenges when it comes to governments too. In Ethiopia, Ethiopian government owns all of the land, and technically they could seize back any land that these farmers begin working with. So we're about to go into Ethiopia as our second project. We're launching that in March. and some of the challenges of land use and land ownership are very important to us as we begin to do this. So we're studying a lot of models and different approaches that people are using. There's some interesting stuff going on in India as well. But if you have any lessons learned or things that you'd like to help us out with in that area, I'd love to listen to you and have a conversation.
Okay, at this point, I have more questions than answers, but yeah, I'll follow up offline.
Or if you hear anybody also that has answers too, please let me know.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for coming out. I was thinking, if you increase crop yield, it's really great for the current generation, right? Because you have a surplus. But if there's a lot of growth in the population, the next generation is kind of back where you started. So I was wondering if you guys do education in your healthcare plan, if you incorporate family planning into that, and what your approach to that is.
We do. So in our healthcare program, we focus mostly on the diseases that are killing the kids. Okay, so in our area, the three big leading causes of death for under fives is diarrhea, malaria, and what's called RTI, or respiratory tract infections. So a lot of our interventions really focus on that, but we also do a lot of maternal health and family planning stuff as well. Because as you just mentioned, one of the biggest challenges is as these communities grow, one of the biggest challenges for fathers and single mothers that actually do own land is parsing that land out to their children. So there's a lot of challenges of migrating populations as well, because villages grow to capacity for these parcels of land, and then you have large tribal migrations to other areas that cause a lot of times tribal conflict, as they begin to enter into a new area. So there's a lot of interesting work being done in teaching farming practices in high value cash crops that require very, very small units of land. A lot of the farming work, agricultural work that's been done to date has been done on anywhere from 1.5 to 2 hectare plots of land. Hectares are about 2.4 acres. The work that we do actually focuses on land sizes of about 1.5 acres and less. And so we really try to take really small plots of land and convert that into a significant increase in capital for the family.
You mentioned wanting your approach to be driven by data and measurements of how successful things were. It's pretty easy to see how that could work in agriculture. How does it work in some of the other domains that you mentioned? That's
a great question. So we have a team, a monitoring and evaluation team that focuses on best practices in monitoring and evaluation, in measurement, in measuring impact in the social sector. And there are best practices in developing metrics. We actually divide our metric system into 2 big pieces. Our first major metric area is what we call poverty metrics. And this is measuring the efficacy of our model at a meta level. So it's understanding, have we created an enabling environment in this community whereby people can make these choices? It focuses on 10 dimensions total. We use a tool called the MPAT, Multidimensional Poverty Assessment Tool, that was developed by a group called EFAD at the UN. And the goal of that tool is actually to measure this enabling environment in 10 dimensions. We focus on 5 of those. But the other 5 are also important. And these are kind of proven, tested metrics that have undergone rigorous kind of scrutiny along the way to ensure that they're measuring what we need to measure. And then below that, though, we have another level of metrics we call program metrics. And each one of our interventions, we actually this is a little bit technical, so I'm sorry if I'm boring you. Nope. Each one of our interventions, we actually put through logic models to ensure that we are measuring outcome metrics. A lot of groups end up measuring input metrics, like how many people attended a meeting, how many people were trained, how many bed nets did we sell here, okay, or things like that. What we try to measure to the best of our ability in our program metrics are outcome metrics. Yep. Okay, so how many people are getting malaria? What was our increase in crop yield? What's our increase in household savings? How many people got diarrhea last month? Those kind of things. And so through the development, and these are not metrics that we just made up. Sure. These are again, we do our best to learn from other people. So we took best practices in evaluating and measuring efficacy of models, and we kind of built a composite metric system that forms our program metric system.
And so do you have results yet that you can look at that and say, yes, this is working, this isn't? Or
Yeah, so we have results in agriculture and economic development. We call it CED, community economic development. We don't have those yet in health, education, and water because we just collected our baseline data. So we want to give the model enough time so that the evaluation will actually make sense.
Right.
If we measure too quickly, it's not going to really show us anything. So we're looking in about 6 months to begin collecting metric data again to begin seeing what the efficacy levels of our models are. And again, these are prototypes. So these are models that have worked in other areas of the world that we are now implementing. And these are models that we can see anecdotal evidence of success, but it's not data-driven yet. So one of the projects we have right now is we're building out a pretty massive database to be able to house all that data so that we can do solid kind of queries and analysis that will inform operational decisions and design.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
So what steps do you have to take to keep your people secure in Kenya? And I suppose you'll be going other places that are less secure later. Ethiopia, you said? And
Ethiopia.
Yes. And how well do they work? I mean,
how what? I'm sorry?
How well do they work? What
Yeah.
fraction of your people have various unpleasant things that could happen to them?
Right. So that's a great question, and we chose Kenya first, and Kenya is I mentioned relatively politically stable, but I'm sure if you know much about the recent history of Kenya, there was a lot of violence actually in the last elections, and there were over 300,000 people that were killed in that violence. And so there are things that happen even in the most stable countries. We like to think about, we feel like extreme poverty is a real driver of violence and conflict. And we like to think about all the countries that we work in on a failed state spectrum. Some of those at the very top, like Somalia, are completely in a failed state situation. Others that are more stable, like Kenya or Tanzania, it wouldn't take that much actually to push the country into a failed state situation. So whether we're working in a quote unquote safe country or in one of the failed states at this point, we need to think about security measures. So in Kenya, for our expat staff, we've built a small little compound where they are housed, and they have security there that protects their own persons as well as their kind of property for folks that are operating with us. But in the community as well, this is a community-led, community-driven project. We don't have outside Kenyans coming in doing this. So what tends to happen, because we measure something called the penetration rate in our communities. What percent of the population is actually involved in our projects? A lot of organizations see between 10 and 15. We see between 70 and 75. And that's really important for security, because if you have a lot of the population in these villages that are involved in your project, anything that threatens the success of that project, they will protect themselves. And we've seen some great results from that. We had some of our staff get mugged and beat up. We had one of our farmers killed. And the community really rallied around that to protect any further incursions from happening. So while there have been some incidents, the community themselves actually protect. And I'm assuming you're talking about mostly local staff. Is that protection, security issues? Yeah. So the community themselves have been protecting and safeguarding them, because they don't want this project to fail. They feel like it's their project. It's theirs to own, and it's theirs to protect. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
So first of all, I think that the sort of model of identifying local leadership and having the community drive it itself is great, and I think it answers a lot to this sort of current polarizing debate around whether aid is totally paternalistic or totally necessary. So I think it's a nice in between. But I was wondering, given that there's obviously different politics and governance systems and security issues that you're dealing with, as well as like vastly different cultural variances, like how do you actually identify that leadership? Do those people come to you? Do you work with Peace Corps people in the area? Like how do you actually go about starting in a community?
That's a great question. Our leadership development program is, I mentioned before, is the foundation of everything we do, and that includes how we screen, identify, and equip leaders from the very start. And I'll give you some examples of how we do it, because it's a little more concrete. Okay, so when we first go into an area, we might call a leader meeting. And you have a lot of characters come to the leader meeting, right? You have a lot of self-proclaimed leaders that are there to leverage whatever assets you have. You know, people see Westerners come in and they automatically, there's funding, there's money, there's whatever, I want whatever handout they have coming, especially in areas where there's been a lot of international development work. So at that meeting, we're very clear, and our local staff are very clear. We actually make an effort. We learn the language there because we feel like that's an issue of respect. So we talk to the people, and also our local leaders or translators are also talking to the people. And we tell them, first of all, we're not here, there's not going to be any handouts. There's not going to be any programs or services either. We're here to learn about your community and the challenges that your community faces in poverty. And that's it. We'd like a couple of you to help us out in trying to understand and meet members of your community. But you're not going to be paid. It's a volunteer position, and we'd love for some of you to come up and work with us. And immediately you lose like 80% of the people in the room, right? So that leaves probably 20% of the folks. We actually have 3 kind of levels of screening for our leaders. The first one is this issue of the attitude of service. They have to have an attitude of service for the community. And that's the first level of screening. So we get that 20%, and we say, hey guys, can you take us to the field and start introducing us to some farmers? So we go to the field and talk to the farmers, and we ask the farmers, not who are the leaders in the community, because leader carries a lot of baggage. Folks in these areas, leadership is a position to leverage for your own gain. And that's what they're used to seeing their leaders. So instead we say, hey, are there any individuals in this community who have really helped you when times are tough, that you really look up to, that has helped your family get through really bad times and has mobilized the community together to push through a rough spot in history? So they point us to those folks, and then we go and recruit them. We recruit those individuals to try to get them in the door. So we take that 20% and this recruited kind of cadre of leaders that the farmers have pointed us to, and they begin kind of a cadre of leaders that we start working with. These folks now enter into a probation period, and the second level of screening is, can they show up on time? Can they demonstrate the work ethic that we need for this job? So can they show up on time? Can they work long hours and long days? They're not paid. They're paid a small stipend, essentially opportunity cost for being away from their farm, so they can still feed their families, but they're not paid a salary. So it's a 6-month probation period where they really have to be dedicated to be able to make it through that. At the end of that 6 months, if they've proven themselves, now they enter into the final stage of screening. So we hire them as a staff member. We pay them a market-based salary, a truly market-based salary based on experience and knowledge level that they would earn on the outside, not in another NGO. NGO compensation markets is crazy. There's the old adage about the World Vision bus driver who all these doctors leave medical clinics to go become World Vision bus drivers because they're paid so highly. We actually try to pay really market-based salaries, actually slightly below market, to ensure incentives are proper. So we start paying these folks a salary, and then we actually evaluate them for core competency in the program area they're working in. And this is done through a rigorous performance evaluation system, similar actually to the one that you guys have here, or you would see at McKinsey. Actually, we use your 360 feedback forms from Google actually as part of what we do. I'm sure you all love 360 feedback, and it's part of what we do. So that actually is a very rigorous kind of performance-based evaluation that and we lose a lot of people along the way. But this helps ensure that we get the right types of leaders in the positions that we're in. And all along the process, they're receiving a ton of training and capacity building, equipping them to be critical thinking, problem-solving innovators.
Great.
Sorry, I got to go.
Why don't we just take one more question and then wrap it up?
All right. Thanks for the talk. Great talk. No slides. Very good. No, I appreciate that. I guess my question is, a lot of charity evaluation systems, they'll say like, is there a funding gap? Like if you were suddenly to receive if Larry shows up and gives you like $1 billion, what would you do with that?
Is he here?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Is Larry in the house? What would you do with that money? Or is the funding gap not the big issue? Is it like, do you need other kinds of resources like talent? Do you need people to develop things for you?
Mm-hmm.
Like what are the big challenges that you see sort of in the next 6 months to a year?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I'll tell you that this sector, the biggest thing that we suffer from is lack of good people. Okay, we need the best and brightest out there to apply their minds and their thought processes to this problem. Extreme poverty is the greatest crisis of humanity for our time. And we, as our generation, has the ability to do something about that. So it's people. Human resources is the greatest gap that we experience. Now, there's also clearly a funding gap. The challenge that organizations experience in the funding gap is if Larry showed up today and said, I'll give you $1 billion, I can't use $1 billion. But the reason for that is we're not through proof of concept yet. We have 3 more years to get through proof of concept. When a model that's scalable and sustainable reaches proof of concept, then it can take a large amount of funding and begin scaling rapidly around the globe. As long as you have a steady income stream or revenue stream to be able to do the financial capital to be able to do that, but also a steady pipeline of solid, effective leaders who can lead that expansion. Right? I mean, you guys at Google here have grown at an astronomical rate. And one of the challenges that you've had in that, I'm sure, is people problems, right? Continuing to find high quality people that can join your ranks, even with your great brand. So a young organization like us, we have to define a very effective brand so people understand what we're doing and how we're doing it. And it's an attractive, there's a lot of a clear value added from what we're doing. And we need to be able to show that when you come to Nuru, you're going to be able to have global impact using the resources and abilities and skill sets that you bring to the table. So I'd say those are the two biggest challenges, human resources and financial capital. But once you get through that proof of concept stage, if your organization is set and wired to be scalable and sustainable, you've done your homework and you build a model to be able to do that, and your organization has the capacity to do that, then you can really use that money. And actually, one final thing I'll say on that is, one of the things that folks in the social sector suffer from is this concept of you need to build a company. You know, too many organizations are structured so they have this little project going in Africa and there's nothing to support it. If you want to do this right, you have to build a company. You have to have human resources. You have to have finance. You have to have a marketing and branding team. You have to build a company, a high value, high quality company to deliver a high quality product. And it takes good people.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question.